Hi everyone, it's Tom Morgan from The Leading Edge, and today I'm joined by Freddy Silva. The background, for those of you who've been reading along recently on my Substack, is my wife's Portuguese, my in-laws are Portuguese. We had a pretty interesting trip to Portugal, including the town of Freddy's birth, Sintra, near Lisbon, and a bunch of fun synchronicities erupted. One of the members of our group is an expert in the Freemasons and the Templars. And there's a lot of fascinating history in Portugal around the Freemasons and the Templars. But it led me to Freddie's work, which I found classically mind expanding, but also well researched and well grounded. And I wanted to introduce him to us. I wanted to introduce his work to us so that we can have a larger discussion because there's a lot of interesting implications from it. So, Freddie, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Tom. And yeah, we seem to have a bit of a connection here. I sound like a Brit. I am actually British, but I was born in Portugal, and I live in America as well, like you. All very strange, very confusing.
Yeah, well, you like me have had a what I would call a non-linear career, and I've noticed that all of the most interesting people have had non-linear careers. So if you wouldn't mind just giving us a couple of seconds on your background, and then we can get into it.
Yeah, I mean, I was born in the vicinity of Sintra, one of the most beautiful places on the planet. Slowly being overwhelmed by mass tourism, but there are demonstrations coming up which may change that, and I hope they do. And I moved to London when I was 8, and got very much interested into rock and roll. I was actually touched on the head by Freddie Mercury, which is one of the high points of my life, and I wanted to do what he did. You know, when you had 8,000 armpits like this, when you strum a big chord, and I thought that's what I want to do for a living. But I was smart enough to realize that I didn't quite have what it took to be a rock and roll star. I had some sort of common sense in my ear, and I followed the path into graphic design. I was one of the youngest creative directors in London. I went into advertising, then I moved to the States to actually make some money. And I was thoroughly miserable. I mean, every time I got laid off for having a conscience and speaking out and saying, look, we can't advertise this, it kills people. There's research behind this. And, my wife would give me a hard time. And then I'd sit around looking at all the books that I gathered about pyramids and, fairies and large upright rocks. And I thought, this is where my heart is. I want to find out what's the bigger picture is. Why did people build things with huge rocks all around the world? And how can I make a living doing it? So it was a slow, gradual process, but one thing led to another. And I had a lot of interesting experiences when I was going back to Britain to spend my vacations. And I go to Avebury, I go to Stonehenge, and I go to other megalithic sites, and unusual things began to happen in around me and also to me. And luckily, I met some very fascinating people who were great psychics and great accountants, by the way, a good mix of left brain and right brain. And these are people who also work with the police, by the way. They're not just your average street corner psychic. They're very intuitive people. And I've seen things coming from them that predict events which happen several days afterwards, a major events I'm talking about here. So it's all very validatable. So they were my guides, and they gave me kind of a grounding to understand what I was going through. And one day I just took a leap of faith and said, bugger it. I'm just going to go and research crop circles because there's so much evidence here to prove the crop circles are not made by two guys with a piece of string and a wooden board. And wrote a book which ends up being an international bestseller. It still is. And you can't get any luckier than that. And from then, it was just discovering that crop circles leads into ancient sacred sites. It's the same methodology, same construction technique, except one uses crushed wheat, the other one uses large rocks. But the end result was a raising of human consciousness. And of course, that goes down a huge rabbit hole where how long has this been going on? And, through 9 books and about 15 documentaries later, I'm still looking for the answers, but slowly narrowing down the path that, we're all looking for this, how to get out of my 9 to 5 job where I'm making so much money, but I'm thoroughly miserable. Well, the answer's been there for over 12,000 years. And there's nothing really new I can say in this topic, except we keep reinventing the same story about, well, you have to discover yourself. You have to go out into the big wide world, experience life in all of its tastes, and form your own toolbox that helps you discover why you're here and what your soul really is all about. And I can tell you from personal experience, it does work because 30 years later, I'm still touring and I'm still writing. So this can happen to anybody. I'm not special in that respect. What I'm doing, and the changes that have happened to me in my personal life and my spirituality can happen to anyone, and I'm still teaching about it. So it's been very non-linear, and I had no idea it was going to end up like this, and I'm still not anywhere near the end. So who knows where it's going to go?
I think that's actually an extremely inspirational story for a lot of people in our audience, because most people have these very, very powerful left brained abilities, but then they start getting a right brained pull to something that makes absolutely no sense. But
Yeah.
then the right brain pulls shouldn't make any sense. They're non-linear, they're energetic, they're non-verbal, they're emotional, they're somatic. And every single data point I come across where someone had the courage to take that leap outside, which is, that's a big deal for a lot of people. A lot of people don't do it. And then to watch things unfold where they get drawn into deeper and deeper mysteries. I think that's genuinely quite inspirational for a lot of people in our group who often find themselves being drawn to subjects that would be deemed esoteric or often, a little bit laughable by the mainstream, and then it ends up blossoming into something magical. So
Exactly.
it draws me to ask, what did you find there? I've consumed a vast amount of your content, well, a fair amount of your content, and it seems to me that there's an alternate arc of history that comes out a lot of this research that really upends a lot of the consensus that we were taught at school and at university. How do you frame your discoveries in the context of how we look at the world now?
Oh, I use the consensus as the foundation for the research and tie it into mythology, which is essentially a theatrical device for you to help understand a very complex issue. It just sounds crazy because you don't understand the language, but you have to understand where our ancestors were coming from, see it from their point of view, and then you start going through the myths one by one and discovering, wait a minute, there's actually something behind this. And I point a lot to Fritjof Capra's work, who wrote a great book called The Tower of Physics back in the late 60s, 70s. And he said, it's funny, scientists go to extreme lengths to try and understand the minuteness of the universe and give these tiny little molecules the most complex names to try and understand a universe that is hidden from view. And yet the ancients were doing exactly the same thing, using different adjectives and verbs. So we're talking about the same problem, trying to understand and make sense of all of this, coming at it from different points of view. And how I try to talk to people is using the few things that I learned when I was in advertising, which is I have a problem. I have to sell it to a skeptical public. And the one thing I do is I have an experience and I listen to people who've been here 10, 20, 30,000 years ago and listen to their stories. And I go, well, how do I sell this to a skeptical public? And that's where the research comes in, going to libraries and doing the work. And 5 years later, you got a book. These things don't happen overnight. And so basically, I'm using the people who came up with these consensus that limits our understanding of the past, because any consensus is always going to throw out 90% of the information. And I know archaeologists who gave up being archaeologists for that reason. They said, we saw so much evidence being thrown out because it doesn't fit the consensus view. And that's not, it's a bit like taking a good pint of beer and watering it down by 90% of water. It doesn't work. So that's where I got excited. Why did our ancestors come up with these incredible stories of, people, tall, 8.5 foot tall people building megalithic sites, moving stones through the air using sound, because it happens all over the world. And now we have science saying, actually, that's how they did it, because we can reproduce the same thing in a laboratory in Princeton, which they have, by the way. So I'm kind of using the archaeology, the history, and saying this is where we began. But if we just step outside the box for a second without any prejudice and let the ancients speak and bring in other evidence to the fore, I can build a better, create a better stew. I don't use two ingredients. I use 400 ingredients, and then everything fits together beautifully. And I'm still nowhere close to the truth, by the way. Only the people that came up with the original event know what the truth is. People like me are trying to, put myself in their shoes to find out what they were talking about. And that's where the hard work comes in. And it is very, very hard work. But the point is, that the consensus view is so narrow. And if we now start looking beyond that box and allowing the other information that has been censored, and it really is being censored, then the story becomes much more interesting. And the story really is personal. It's about who we are, how we got here, and how we did the things that we did back then that we can't do now.
So your work around sacred sites specifically is absolutely captivating. You know, Stonehenge, pyramids in Egypt, Tomar in Portugal. What do you think the purpose of the sites was, and how did it work?
Oh, that's a very big story. In fact, before I get into that,
Mm.
case in point, Stonehenge. So the official view, 3000 BC, gets rebuilt 2600 BC. We had channeled material that said that no, the site is actually 8000 BC. And it took 10 years for the archaeologists to go and dig up the 56 holes around the original site, which is still there, by the way, just covered with grass now. And they found the original chips of the bluestones that came from Wales and show that they were moved to the center of the circle where they are today. And the organic material attached to the stones dated to 8000 BC. So you see, this is the point I'm trying to make. Um, I've just finished. It's funny we should bring up that point. I've just finished a documentary called Megalith, of all things, which talks about the three biggest concentrations of megaliths on the planet, and that is central Portugal, northern Scotland, the islands of Scotland, where the megaliths appear for the first time before the rest of England, Stonehenge not included, and also Brittany and Finistère, northern coast of France. They all share the same sort of blueprint. They all went through a great lot of trouble to get a certain type of stone with the right type of quartz, with the right type of iron, hornblende, and magnetite. So when you go to Egypt and you hear the story of why they brought rocks from 400 miles away to build the core of the Great Pyramid, you think, well, what was special about the rock? And it's very energetic. These rocks basically behave like big batteries. They attract earth currents, which are everywhere, by the way. Like the body has arteries and veins, the earth has its invisible currents of electromagnetic energy. And wherever you find the lines crossing, you'll find an ancient sacred site. So they already understood what was going on. So the next step is why build these things where they were? Well, because you're trying to harness this energy into the actual stones of the monuments to act as a big place that holds this energy. And the big question from that is, well, what were they doing with it? That's the hard part. So far, I figured out, and this is from 40 years of work, and not just from me, but from many, many people. Those energies ally with the body's state of consciousness. If you go there in a certain state of mind at a certain time of the day, you literally are touching something greater than yourself, but it's built on the same rules of electromagnetism. And you'll have an outer body experience, you'll have a healing, you'll have an expanded consciousness. This is why people still go to these sacred places all around the world. There is now a measurable way to find out that the stones and the temples are designed in a certain way that will impart the energy onto your body. You just have to be aware that it's there and allow it to happen. If you go there as a skeptic, it won't happen because you've already programmed yourself to believe that I'm not feeling what I think I'm feeling because I think I'm going mad. No, you're not going mad. Your body is telling you that you're in a special energetic environment and you're feeling different because it's trying to get you to stop thinking and move you to a different frequency where you start picking up things from an invisible universe. It's one of the greatest things called initiation. This is how initiation began, to allow yourself to have a shamanic experience, leave the body and go traveling and come back with incredible amounts of information. If I was to tell you that Isaac Newton was one of these practitioners, Leonardo da Vinci, one of these practitioners, Pythagoras and Plato also did this as well. And look what they accomplished. And they gave credit to the fact that they connected with something greater than themselves by going to certain prescribed temples in their particular region. I don't know which one Isaac Newton went to, but I bet it was Stonehenge. And they came back with information from an astral reference library, and they applied it, and they became the giants that we know them for today. So those are a couple of things that I know are already going on. But just having come back from Britain a couple of weeks ago, I also learned that all of these major locations are major energy hotspots on the face of the earth that are tied into to not just a telluric current, but also to gravitational hotspots. So gravity behaves a little differently around these areas, and that also allies with brainwave patterns, which allows you a window of opportunity to connect with something greater than yourself. And there's also the possibility that they all happen to mark the Earth's most active seismic zones, which sounds a bit stupid when you think about it. You're going to build these big monuments on the most seismic parts of the planet. Brittany is essentially France's most active earthquake zone, and yet the stones are still upright, they still work. So what's happening is, because of where the position, the Earth is vibrating ever so slowly all day long. You can't really notice it unless there's a 1.0, 2.0 earthquake. It's in a constant state of vibration, and that vibration transfers to the stones and all its quartz, which is a piezoelectric material, and it stores the energy like a big battery. So why were they doing this? Was it to maintain the integrity of the site forever? Or were they trying to basically quell the frequency of earthquakes in that region? That's something that I'm still working on. And there's probably still other things that we don't know, which NASA's now beginning to pick up, which is that wherever you find big concentrations of these ancient monuments, there are these tubes, and they call them vortices of magnetic energy, that every 8 minutes they open up and they connect to these solar wind 1,000 miles above the atmosphere, and they link all the way to the sun. So now we've got the technology to actually map that there's something happening on the Earth where these tubes go up beyond the Earth and they connect to our biggest star and possibly beyond that. And but this was written in 16,000 BC in India, in the Ayurveda. They already described the same process using different language. So that's the beauty of all of this. It's a very old technology to get us, I think, fundamentally, to connect with something greater than the physical world, which brings us back to your question. Can we get out of this very linear box-like environment in our everyday life? Yes, you can. The ancients built us these temples, these monuments, so we can remind ourselves that the physical world and a career is not the end all and be all of everything.
Now, I understand if this is all true, why, the Catholic Church in 1100 wouldn't quite fancy people having direct experience of the divine or the goddess or whatever, right? But what I don't understand is, in a world where information is effectively ubiquitous, that if this technology works the way it was, two questions. Why isn't the knowledge of it relatively ubiquitous? And two, why was it previously kept secret in human history?
Oh, I think it was pretty well known until about 1500 BC, when you get the collapse of the Bronze Age. There was really not much warfare or any evidence of warfare going on before then, believe it or not. It's only when the Earth goes through big convulsions, which happens very periodically, by the way, solar flares being one great example, and we go into a fear mode. And when you get into a fear mode, you become possessive of people around you, your land, your food supply, and that's where things start falling apart. And when things fall apart, we invent something called religion. I'm not talking about faith. I'm talking about religion. Faith is something you really should have, no matter what it is. You've got to believe in something in order to give you the impetus to become who you came here to be. Because we are very limited in our understanding of who we are. And that's one of the reasons why these temples exist as well. Discover who you are. So when you start getting to the religion thing and the fear aspect, now you're removing yourself from nature. This is what it's all about. It's all about removing yourself from nature. And then you got those wonderful people who look at this and go, wait a minute, we can control people when they're in fear because they're in lack. They're in a mentality of lack. So if we can tap into that, we become the intermediaries between them and nature. What most people call God, by the way. That's what God is. It's nature. It's not someone, it's something, and it has no religious context. We're all an expression of that creative force, fundamentally. So we're not really separate from it. So when religion comes along, and specifically the Catholic Church, and says, no, no, you are separate from God, you have to talk to us as the intermediary, and we'll tell you how things are. We'll explain to you how the truth really works. And of course, for the last 1800 years in Europe and much of the world, we've been seduced and brainwashed by the fact that we can't talk to the source between ourselves. And that's led to the lack of understanding of what sacred sites are all about, what the universe is all about. And then you got science coming up at the end of the Renaissance, which then tries to rationalize everything. And unless you can, show in a very rationalistic way what you're talking about, these invisible lines of force that go for the landscape, or the fact that you're having an out-of-body consciousness, it doesn't exist. Well, now we have technology, and NASA is a great example of proving that these tubes of energy do connect to something much greater. We have the technology to show that actually science is just now catching up to what our ancestors knew intuitively and experienced physically many thousands of years ago. So that's how it came about. We go through these changes in society very regularly, where for a certain amount of time things are working beautifully. We're not afraid. We're all working with each other, and we step out of the box and we experience life to a much, much wider degree. And then the fear comes in, and we all do this. You hold on for dear life, and you become very possessive of stuff around you, and that's when things go wrong. I've observed history over the last 1,000 years, 2,000 years, and I've watched this happening again and again. And the only people that ever benefit are the few who are basically telling you how reality is, not what it actually truly is. It's an imitation in order to control the public's point of view so they can benefit and you don't. That's what it comes down to, really. It's a very cliched idea, but it really is. It's about control that if we control the truth, then we can benefit from it, and you don't. That's what it comes down to.
Mm. I couldn't be more on board with the idea that this kind of information needs to be democratized, but also you kind of have to hold this tension that these were very powerful technologies that were held in lineage by very wise people. You're not just going to go to a sacred site and blow your doors off. And you yourself have made the point, what you take into the temple is what you'll get, but be careful what you wish for. Is there scope for both abuse and misuse of this technology if it works in the way that you say it does?
Yes, it has been abused, and that's why we find many places that have been shut down. One of my favourites, one is down in Wiltshire, in England. It's called the West Kennet Long Barrow, and it's a giant's grave. They found the bones of 8.5 foot tall people in there, and that's why they call them that way. And they're all over Brittany. They're all over many Siberia. These things get destroyed by the Natural History Museum, and I know that for a fact because I knew archaeologists that worked there, and they said we watched the bones being destroyed because they didn't fit the paradigm. I mean, that's not archaeology, that's censorship. And they literally just gave up. They said, I can't do this in all conscience. So the idea is that you're sort of following this paradigm, and then the whole thing breaks down, and you have to come back to a sense of stability in order to understand what's really going on around you. You have to become part of your own. You have to be your own leader. Don't follow what anybody else is saying. Just follow your own path because and that's what the Greek mystics were saying all along. People like Pythagoras and Plato were saying, no, you have to discover and follow your own path. You can't let someone else tell you what to do. You can follow teachers, absolutely, but they might be wrong too. I mean, I could be wrong. I've never said, don't take what I say for granted. I'm going to give you 15 pages of a bibliography in the back of the book. Find out where I got my information from, follow the trail. And if it works for you, that's fantastic because I could be wrong. I don't think I am so far. But there's those times when I have to change a paragraph here or there because I didn't have sufficient information. But that's part of the discovery of science. It's about doing the best you can with the information that you have. And more information comes in front of you, and you go, well, we can get rid of that theory because that doesn't work, obviously. This we can change, and that makes the theory much more interesting because we have access to more information that shapes our understanding. But it's still not the full understanding. You have to be very open-minded in this kind of work and be allowed to make mistakes once in a while. But I always tell people, I've got my own toolbox. I've discovered things through my process, which goes through I go through life experiencing things, and I go, well, that was interesting. Why did that happen? And how can I turn this into a way that helps people understand what's going on here? And the moment I do that, looking back on my life in the last 30 years, I mean, people come out of the woodwork. I get emails from people I've never heard of that will answer the question I just posed 5 minutes ago. Books fall out of shelves. I mean, it's this magic. It's like this attraction. And slowly I realize I'm tapping into something much, much bigger than myself. And I trust the process. I let it go. And 9.9 times out of 10, it ends up in something really cohesive, a really interesting way of showing how the universe works, how people in the past worked, how the Templars worked as well, because they were following the same tradition, regardless of what you hear on YouTube and all of that, most of which is no resemblance to reality. So that's what I tell you to tell people. You have to go out there and experience the world. You have to sometimes fall flat on your face, don't make a habit of it. But that's how you discover your purpose in life is by having these experiences, doing things that you didn't think you wanted to do, and forget about the people that laugh at you because they haven't got a clue. They really did not have a clue. Uh, Forget about the peer pressure. Forget about people who are going to say, "Oh no, he's away with the fairies." Being away with the fairies is actually a very, very good way to live, believe me, because I could be giving you stories about that forever. And I didn't even think this stuff was even possible. But when you connect with something, again, in the realm that lives all in 99% of the universe is invisible, it lives around you. And when you interact with that, you go, my God, this actually is real. Just like the Stoics used to say, just like the mystics used to say. And they're absolutely true. But you've got to go out there and discover it for yourself. You can't have someone telling you what it is.
It's interesting you talk about that quality of research. One of the big influences on our group has been a chap called Peter Kingsley, and he's a very, very diligent classicist, but also a huge fan of Carl Jung. And one of his central theories is that there was essentially a shamanic culture underlying Western civilization that we forgot about, seeded by Pythagoras, but also involving what he called incubation, which was darkness meditations in sacred sites where you would quote unquote meet the goddess of Persephone. But I noticed in your writing, all of these sites, well, a lot of these sites were dedicated to the divine feminine, Isis, Persephone, Mary Magdalene. Why do you think that was? Why the divine feminine?
I sort of dwelled on this for years, and I was sort of meditating upon this. And I think I was in Peru, up in the Andes, where the air is thin, and you can think easier when the air is thin. Or maybe I was in the desert somewhere, I can't remember. And I was thinking about this. How did this whole divine feminine come along? And it's just one of those moments of clarity when you realize it's funny. I heard this story in Polynesia. They talked about how in the beginning there was the universe and the creator was the universe because the creator couldn't create what it created from a vacuum. It had to have complete understanding of how to create a planet, animals, and plant life. You can't just go from nothing into all of this. And I thought, okay, so how do they take this to the next stage? And I tapped into something from Persia, which had exactly the same story, but then filled in the details that they left out because these stories are thousands of years old and part of the information is missing. So sometimes you've got to do a cross-cultural overlap to fill in the gap. And they said, well, we've reasoned that in the beginning there was no light and there was no sound, there was complete darkness. So if the creator knew everything about how to create the entire universe, all the knowledge, all the wisdom that exists resides in the dark. And because it was expansive, because it creates, it has to give birth. So therefore, it's kind of a feminine quality. So how do we describe this to people who are illiterate? I know we'll create a statue or a picture of a woman who gives birth, and we'll paint the skin black to represent the darkness of the universe, wherein lies or where lay originally all the knowledge, all the wisdom that ever was at the beginning of time. And this is where you get the birth of the Black Madonna. So when you go through Europe looking at the statues of the Black Madonna, it's not because she came from Ethiopia or Africa, nothing to do with that. It's a metaphor. She is the woman that represents the wisdom that resides in the dark at the beginning of time. And because this wisdom had to expand and create everything, it has a feminine quality. So it's not about gender. It's about the metaphor that explains how the universe is created. And I thought this is so elegant. But again, you have to understand the symbol and the metaphor. And it takes time to go through the whole process. And this is why every time you go to a place in Greece or in Egypt or in Persia or in India, on the island of Mull in Scotland as well. There's another one. You have these temples, either natural or man-made, that are dedicated to a divine virgin. And when you pick up the story in the 12th century of the Templars, this is where I found the Templars so exciting. They had this initiation ceremony, again called incubation, in the secret chambers at the bottom of the buildings, and they had to the successful candidate would marry a divine bride. Well, this gives rise to the story of the Grail that Chrétien de Troyes wrote. Exactly on the day that they were putting the cornerstone to their most famous building in Tamar, by the way. So there's a story right there as well. And I thought, why were they always marrying a divine bride? And I read the end of the story, the Grail, and it said the Grail enters the building and it's on a tray. I said, oh, how can the Grail be on a tray if she's a woman? Oh, wait a minute. The woman is holding the tray, which is a ceremonial tray upon which is this cup, which holds the entire Grail. I thought, well, maybe it's a drink. Oh, I get it. Because this is the old, again, going back to symbols, when you understand the ancient mysteries teachings, you don't read the teachings, you drink the knowledge. It's an old metaphor. You drink, you imbibe the knowledge, and you become the knowledge. And because the knowledge is based on a feminine principle, you are marrying a divine bride when you reach the end of your initiation. So suddenly, from the Templars all the way to Japan, I had the whole story lined up by doing a cross-cultural comparison of these different stories and going, yeah, every time you see the story of marrying a divine bride, or there's a woman holding, sheaves of wheat above the entrance, like you do in Greece, with the purple grain, which is the fungus ergot, which is very toxic, by the way. You have to dilute it before you do your initiation, and you have an out-of-body experience when you're doing it. And at the end, the symbol of your successful journey into the other world and your return, hopefully, was that you just married a divine bride. But it has nothing to do with gender. It's the fact that you've consumed a divine marriage. So that's the one thing that's, really bothers a lot of Christians. It's like, well, Jesus never married because he said only the single ones will enter the kingdom of heaven. Yeah, you have to marry your divine opposites, your masculine and your feminine. You become one person. Of course, he was married. He was married to Mary Magdalene. There's so much proof behind that. And there's children that survived the whole thing. So when you're a single person, you've married your positive and your negative, and the two hemispheres of your personality. You are now a single person, just like in Buddhism. You become the single person and you enter the kingdom of heaven, which of course is the other world, which is the astral reference library that we've been talking about. So you see how the stories are very clever, it's simple, but you have to understand the symbolism until you get there, which paradoxically makes it very difficult to understand.
Yeah, well, I loved the observation that Tomar, the headquarters of the Knights Templar, means to drink. So yeah,
Yes.
it was all everywhere. One of the things that comes up all the time, and to be honest, has been slapping me around the face for the last 2 weeks without
Okay.
mercy, is the concept of vibration and sound and frequency. I couldn't tell you how many times over the last couple of weeks people have just completely randomly sent me content on this. It seems to be that is central to the role of these sites and the technology that underlies them. What's going on there?
A vibration is the foundation of the universe. Everything's in a state of vibration. I mean, if you look at molecules under the microscope and see how quarks and other tiny, tiny little molecules behave, everything is in a state of vibration all the time. If you didn't have vibration, nothing would exist. There'll be absolute balance. Well, if you're in absolute balance, you can't go left or right. You're in a complete state of balance, and you can't move. So there's always movement, and the foundation of every mythology in the world is based on the concept of vibration. For example, the Egyptians were masters of this. They actually decided that everything is living in the universe. Everything has a vibration, has a divine breath behind it. It moves, it's alive. So the priest would come into each room of the temple in the morning and wake up the room as though they're rousing a person from slumber, because it was a living organism. Sound is used throughout the buildings to create these effects, which leave you dumbstruck. If you've ever been in the Cathedral of Wells in England, during the preparation for the School of Music, which is just next door, by the way. I sat there mesmerized by the sonic influence of the building. And of course, the quality of the singers as well. But any person can do this if you go to the Chapter House next door, which few people bother to go to. It's one of the most perfect buildings on the planet. And I've sat there humming, not doing our singing, just humming. And the design of the actual room is in a certain way that gets you to have an out-of-body experience, whether you believe it or not, within minutes, and you realize you've been there for 2 hours, and people leave you alone because when you're humming, people leave you alone if you're doing something important. And yes, I've experienced this just by sitting there quietly, humming into the building, and 2 hours have gone by, and I thought, wow, I just missed lunch, which is very unusual for me. And I said, and I feel really good. It's like every part of your body is just tingling, and you've become part of the building. And that was the whole point. So if you look at the structure of Gothic cathedrals, which the Templars and the Cistercians borrowed from the Muslim world, who borrowed it from the Persians, who borrowed it from the Indian in the Indian subcontinent, all the proportions of the buildings are based on musical proportion, comes back to vibration. If you've got musical proportion, then that's basically the next step up in our audible range of the harmony of the universe. You can't hear the divine vibration of the universe because it's super physical. We have a very limited way to hear things because of the limited structure of the human body. Animals can hear better than us. So our next step is to imitate that by designing buildings which create that vibration. So when you go into the building, and if you're still and you listen to the building, it talks back to you. Chartres Cathedral is another great example. I've had the privilege of being there alone after hours to do a little research. And I can tell you, sitting on or standing in the middle of the labyrinth and just breathing, the breath comes back like a song. It's an extraordinary feeling to hear this. And your body just feels alive, like everything in your body suddenly comes awake. You can feel your heart beating. You can hear your breath. You can start, thoughts become much more concrete. And you think, well, am I imagining this? No, not really, because the building and you have become one organism. So this is how they distill things. They figured that everything's in a state of vibration and everything has a purpose. So to compartmentalize each vibration and then put it into a certain shape in a certain room or a certain building, it fulfills a certain function. So when you go to buildings which look very similar, like pyramids, each pyramid in Egypt does something completely different. Why? Because the shape of the rooms is different. The slope angle is different. So you're going to have a different vibration. That's why you'll never have the same feeling in the two different buildings, because each one has its own specific purpose. So everything in the universe is based on this movement of atoms and molecules. And then we've found a way somehow to diagnose that and make it into these beautiful man-made buildings.
I mean, it's just absolutely fascinating. For me, one of the most interesting and influential people in the world is this Scottish neuroscientist called Dr. Ian McGilchrist, who, funny enough, lives up in Skye. And he's got this absolutely revolutionary theory of the brain and the brain's hemispheres, which completely aligns with everything you're saying, that we've become too left hemisphere dominant in our society, and we need to reunite the hemispheres where effectively the right is leading the left. So you do have this kind of alchemical marriage. But whenever I hear stuff like this, my first thought is, well, kind of everyone needs this. So why was it always gated access? Why is it always associated with elites and secret societies? Why wasn't, I mean, you said this technology used to be widespread, but why isn't it, and why couldn't it be? And should it be restricted to a certain group of people?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it was basically anybody could do this. Yeah, if you ask any farmer, I mean, I used to live in Wiltshire, which is the least populated part of Britain, and my friends were farmers. I used to walk out with them, and they could look at a hedgerow in March and say, "Oh, it's going to be a very early winter." I said, "How do you know?" Because he can hear and see the actual buds in the trees and the way that squirrels are moving around the land and the way that sheep behave and so forth. You're in touch with everything. You are perceiving everything, and then your brain intellectualizes it. That's the way to be. You're using the nature around you to feel what's going on, and then you intellectualize it, and then you apply it. So anybody can do that. So back to the point where we lost the plot around 1600, 1500 BC, we went to this fear mode for 3,500 years. And we're now realizing it doesn't work because the world, everything is falling apart. I mean, literally every single system is falling apart right now, and it should do. We need to move to another level of reality that whereby things do function for the greater good. So what happened is that you had these people who understood things and could explain it to the illiterate people when they lost the plot. Those are called the priests or the magicians or the wizards. And they said, look, if you can give me a few months or better, a few years of your life, I will teach you how you become disconnected from the world around you. So it became part of the mysteries teachings. So fast forward to the time of the Essenes. Now we're getting to organized religion, and they're saying, "Oh no, we can do. In order to reach God, you have to talk to us." But their understanding now becomes very limited because they really had no idea what they were talking about. Because what they were picking up was fragments of information and turning it into an organized religious system for the control of people. That's not what it's about. And that's the point where the mystery schools go underground. So you have the Mandeans, you have the Essenes, you have the Egyptian mystery schools, you have Rosicrucianism, and so forth. The invisible brotherhood. There's so many types of people. And they basically realized that this information is now being used against people. Before, it was something that you could have picked up by yourself. Then we had to find someone to teach it to you, and then we got to a point where we can use the information, restrict it, and use it against you. So this is why the secret mystery schools developed, not because it was a secret that had to be kept from the many. It was to prevent the information from falling into the wrong hands. And again, the Templars are a great example. It wasn't about the fact that the Templars were committing all kinds of heinous crimes, that they were taken down by the church. It was because they knew something that the church wanted and didn't have the right information to connect with these other levels of reality, because what they wanted to do was control most of Europe, which is what they were doing, were very good at doing, and still are, by the way. So what the Templars and many people like them were doing is give us a little bit of your time, and on the first year, we're going to observe you. We're going to teach you some lesser mysteries about the universe, and it's going to get you excited, or at least we hope it will, because if it doesn't, you're going to leave anyway, because it just doesn't make any sense. You can go back to doing what you were doing. But if you're interested, we'll teach you the smaller mysteries. But during that time, they would observe you to find out if you had integrity. The Essenes were doing the same thing, by the way. They had an outer brotherhood where for the first year, they would teach you basic stuff, which you can't do any harm with. And they'd observe you and they go, well, I think he can be trusted. She can be trusted. That one, I'm not so sure about them. And they'd tell them politely, okay, this is not for you. You better go and check out something else. So the reason why it became secret and the secret societies became secret is because they didn't want this falling to the wrong hands. Because when you think about it, and you boil it down to its lowest common denominator, you're moving energy from A to B. We have experiments now at Princeton that were done about 40 years ago that prove that the human mind can alter the outcome of a computer. It's a peer-reviewed experiment. It's very, very famous. And there's been many more like it since. And if you can do that, then if you can take your intention and use energy, you can create horrible things with it. You can destroy people with it. And yes, you can. So the point was to teach people who had the integrity how to use this information so they can improve themselves and the world around them. And then everybody benefits. So that's why it became secret. It was a kind of a fail-safe system so that the world wouldn't collapse much quicker than it is right now. So the whole idea of this, of these secret societies were very malevolent. Not really. You don't understand what a secret society is unless you work for a secret society and you're on the inside, because when you're on the outside, you can only guess. And most of the people that go around projecting this thing about, oh, secret societies are evil. Yes, but you don't belong to the society. How can you possibly know what's going on the inside? That's usually my joke about this. And I know enough about the Masons, and there's good Masons and bad Masons, by the way. There's two different things going on here. But the good Masons, which are the Scottish Rite Freemasons, they've got it right. They're still doing exactly what these people were doing thousands of years ago, and they will teach you, if you got the time, how to do things properly and how to improve yourself and do and create a better world for yourself and other people. And that's what you're supposed to be doing.
So here we are. It seems to me that people's minds are opening. Most of most of my audience is Wall Street, and the grounded curiosity that people have towards these issues that they didn't have even 2-3 years ago is incredibly inspiring. And I think that the explosion of AI will make a lot of this previously esoteric knowledge available to kind of everyone. At least that's what I've been seeing, which fills me with kind of hope and trepidation. So like you've been deep in this for years and years and years. if you had like an ideal way that this plays out from here in terms of how people's worldview shifts and how they interface with these technologies or how these technologies come back into the world, what would it look like?
Oh, I think it comes back to balance and empathy, the basic things which are fundamental to human behavior. And we seem to forget these. I mean, we call them the Ten Commandments now, which are great, except there's 42 of them, which the Egyptian had 42 commandments. I mean, we're now, we're down to the cliff notes here. It comes down to, again, making the best of your life while you're here and improving yourself in the limited time that you have on this planet and this in this physical universe, and also making the world a better place when you leave. That's what it comes down to. I keep trying to narrow it down to a very simple thought, and that's the best I can do. Literally, I've made the best of my limited time here. I've improved myself as a person. At least I hope I have, and I've made the lives of people around me better. In the way that I would like to see it, people being harmonious, being kind to each other, being supportive, being empathetic. And apart from that, there's nothing else I could say that's any new, because there is nothing else new to say about the problems that we have and we're faced with. And I think that if we use the tools in their correct way to make life better for everyone, then everything evolves. I like to see things improve in the way that we can communicate to each other without shouting across the table, despite the fact that, you're a raving Republican and I'm a raving Democrat. I'm sure there are a fine point in between where we realize no matter what we do, extremes never work. You have to find a vein of gold somewhere in between, that where it's not so extreme black and white. It's the point in the middle. The Templars and the Masons knew this when they created that checkerboard pattern. When you walk into Templar buildings and Masonic halls, you get that checkerboard pattern that you walk across the floor. It wasn't about being light, too much light. People seem to think that because you've learned so much, I'm a very enlightened person. I'm all about the light. But that's an extreme. The Jedi found that out, but that didn't work out very well either. You have to understand the dark as well. Darth Vader wasn't the answer either. He took it to the absolute extreme, and look what happened to him. But at the end, when you realize, after you've experienced both extremes, you go, the point is the balance. You have to walk every day in the balance, and that's so hard to do. If you get up every morning and you can do this at least one day a week, you've done really well. And sometimes you have to go into the dark. Sometimes if someone attacks you, you've got to fight your way back and protect your territory, within reason, of course. Sometimes you have to go towards the light. And that's the point of the initiate. You have to choose, take a little bit from the dark, a little bit from the light, and try to walk that path in between. Easy to say, hard to do. And that's the best I can say in terms of advice of how to make the world a better place and use the tools that we're getting, even with AI. As a designer, I can see the benefit of it, but I'm already seeing the detriment of people misusing AI. I mean, just the other day, someone did an AI version of one of my books and put it on YouTube for free. So I had to file a lawsuit, the usual stuff, to make sure they stop doing this. Otherwise, how do I make a living? I can't survive for people reading my work for free. It doesn't work. This takes years of work on my part. I got bills to pay. There's a quid pro quo. So it's already being abused. But if we just sort of tend to our own patch, because people tend to think that all these problems are beyond my ability to solve. Well, they're not. If you start thinking in terms of the world, you can't solve the world's problems. You can only solve what's around you, within your immediate vibration, within your immediate vicinity. If you can see the ripples around your stone that you threw in your own pond, you can control those ripples, but you can't see the ripples once they get to the shore because the shore is so far away. So let someone else take care of that. Empower the people that are closer to the shore to do what they need to do to make the system much more tangible to people, and make sure that everybody elevates at the same time. So if you can just restrict yourself to what you can do, then you're in control of your actions. And you basically, to quote Gandhi, if you make your garden as beautiful as you can, you've just influenced your neighbor who says, "Hey, that's a great way to grow peas and corn. Can I do that?" Sure, of course you can. And then the other neighbor will say, "Well, this is horrible. I want to rip out the garden because it's a mowing nightmare. I want to make a concrete path." That's fine for him too. He can only influence so many people. Let him do what he wants. But as long as you don't impinge on other people's rights, then you're walking the fine line. You're being the example you wish to see, but don't impose it. Again, I keep coming back to cliches, but they are so true. If it's right, you don't need to rewrite it in another way.
So you mentioned your book. You're absolutely prolific in terms of books and documentaries. If someone's listening to this and is not familiar with your work and wants a place that's accessible and can feed the curiosity on this topic, where would you point them to?
Oh, my website has all the, what is it, 8 books, 9 books? I've forgotten then, 15 documentaries. It's called invisibletemple.com, which is exactly what it's about. It's your invisible temple, the thing that you don't see. And it's all backed up. I mean, I get laughed at by some of the printers that said, the book would be a lot cheaper to print if that much of the book wasn't the bibliography. I said, yeah, but that's where I get my information from. I want you to know that I've done due diligence as best as I can, and not take my word for it. I can prove to you that there's a thought process, and so far, I don't get many arrows going my way. So I guess I must be doing something right. I become an influencer in a certain way, which is a horrible word. But yeah, that's where you'll find it. And if it works for you, fantastic. I mean, it's worked for me. I'm not the person that I used to be when I was living in the left brain world, making a lot of money, being thoroughly miserable, not understanding why I'm here, not making a difference to the world in terms of a positive change. And now I feel so many people are now taking on what I've said and what I've written about, and they're implementing it. And I see, oh, it's improved their lives as well. So I can feel pretty good about that when I die one day. I go, I've made someone's life much better. So if we can all think the same way, we're going to reach the same point in the near future, because we'll need to. We need to make huge changes in the world and the way we do things right now.
Well, that speaks to your garden being enviable and beautiful because you put so much work into it. And I think a lot of that was you having the bravery to follow your curiosity into areas that other people wouldn't. And I think that showing that it's had such a profound impact on your life is in itself pretty inspirational for the people listening.
Well, thank you. It hasn't been easy, I have to say. It's you do lose a lot of friends and people along the way, but they weren't your friends anyway if they don't follow you, if they don't believe you and support you, even though you have a different point of view. They weren't your friends to begin with. So I go back to Buddhism and Zen to help me out on that one. And I don't even have a garden, by the way. I live in a one-bedroom apartment, but I have a metaphoric garden, and it supplies me with pretty much what I need.
A lovely thought. Freddie Silva, thank you for giving us your time today.
Thanks, Tom.